Hello? Can you all hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today at MoCA. My name is Amanda Hunt. I'm the Director of Education and Public Programs. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce urban and media historian, critic, and novelist Norman Klein. He is Professor of Critical Studies at CalArts and is, of course, author of the iconic The History of Forgetting, Los Angeles and the Erasure of Memory, which I personally read as soon as I arrived in Los Angeles 5 years ago. I'm sure many others in the room did the same thing. It's required reading. But Norman's also written other incredible publications such as The Imaginary 20th Century, 7 Minutes, The Life and Death of the American Animated Cartoon, The Vatican to Vegas, The History of Special Effects, and Freud and Coney Island and Other Tales, among others. His essays have appeared in anthologies, museum catalogs, newspapers, scholarly journals, and on the web. His subjects range impressively from European cultural history to animation and architectural studies, from special effects to cinema and digital theory, to the study of Los Angeles, fiction, media design, and documentary film. His work, which also includes exhibitions, has centered on the relationships between collective memory and power in urban spaces, the thin line between fact and fiction, erasure, forgetting, and the social imaginary. As part of today's lecture, which is based loosely on some of the thematics brought forth by Adrián Villar Rojas' exhibition next door, the Theater of Disappearance. If you all have not seen it, we encourage you to go after Norman's lecture. It's an exhibition that deals in quite a spectacular way with ideas of archaeology, accumulation, entropy, and geological time. So Norman will be taking us through a kind of longer form associative talk on what he's calling the archaeologies of the city today. In essence, meaning we'll be kind of going through ideas and questions of what does urban mean in today's world? How are our cities being restaged in this new economy? And particularly how downtown LA is being powerfully redeveloped. Is the urban becoming suburban? For Norman, archaeology is a way of looking at the present. So following today's lecture, we'll take a few questions, but please stick around also to join us for a book signing just in the back of this space. Norman just very recently published Tales of the Floating Class, a beautiful new collection of art writings that he's written since the 1980s that touch on globalization and neo-feudalism, among other subjects. But for now, please join me in welcoming Norman Klein.
I'm going to be so it's on the ruin, right? And it'll deal with the city, because now the ruin is being commodified in cities. I live in Highland Park, which is like Williamsburg pretending to be, I don't know, Periclean Athens with good pizza, that kind of thing. However you want to look at it, right? I lived in Echo Park. I've been watching this process all around the world, but it isn't just that. But the issue of the ruin has something to do with museums and so on. And I decided to begin by using the image browser on Chrome. I decided that the image browser on Chrome is like an algorithmic thing that's essentially a mutant brain doing our dream work for us. You just click it, and then it presents something like dream work, but also from some weird outsider's point of view. It stacks pictures in a sentient order, which means you have this sense of ubiquitous computing affecting how you see them. And it's very tactile somehow. It's based on keywords, qualitative research, and the effect feels very immersive, almost like this show, in a weird way. Quite pleasant, but thoroughly incomplete. Like things rolling on a conveyor belt in a dry cleaning store. But now I have to find out what keywords would work with this talk. And one is obviously the term panorama. So this is 19th century panoramas of different kinds. I'm sure a lot of you know about them, right? Panoramic eye view, this panoramic point of view. This is my favorite one. And then I'll go forward. I have lots of others. This was a panorama of London in 1820s. That was the entire city of London inside a building. Partly because the pollution was already severe enough and they couldn't get up St. Paul's. So people would go and visit London inside a building inside London in Regent Square. And it was very, very elaborate, and it had its own elevator, and it had this strange cylindrical skyscraper effect in the middle. It's a very weird thing. But there are other terms that might take us closer to the subject, and I thought I'll try that. Anyway, it seems fun to do this way, right? I'm bored with clicking and clacking through your favorite images. I'd rather get lost. Let's get lost, okay? Okay. So let's try another way. Panoramic ruins. Now we're getting a little closer, right, to our subject. So hit that, and what weirdness is that going to bring us? Oh, my God. Ridiculous, huh? Well, obviously, these are sort of, they look almost like Coleridge was visiting them or something. But they get even more specific. You go to, let's see if I can get even better, panoramic city ruins. That should be enough for the algorithmic weird brain to find something for us. Oh, I'm not talking right. Can you hear me? I can hear me. I'm sorry. Okay, there we go. It's a weird problem, right? You hear yourself. That's not good enough. Oop, one. Oh, now we're getting stranger. Now it's beginning to look like the show a little bit more. You have odder and odder spaces. Images of what Persepolis looked like. More and more. Oop, one. We're going to go down. It's a principle of immersion, right? That tends to dissolve the foreground and generate this feeling that you're inside a space that notices you but doesn't really notice you. And I'll go one step further and see if we can get a little deeper into what a ruin might be according to this brain, right? Panoramic future ruins. Okay. Victor Bergen. Oh, never mind. A little art reference in here. Oh, now it's getting weirder. Now we're dealing with the simulation of ruins, which is more like what this show is, right? And also, it's a very, very peculiar issue. What is if a ruin is a narrative, right? And the ruin has now become very sexy in the way cities look. And if we're retrofitting all these old buildings, I'll show you some of the retrofits, but you know many of them already. What is the narrative about? What time frame is it covering? How do we begin to read it? How do we begin to work with it? And why do we sort of find it slightly annoying, right? Why do we feel it's condescending and it's politically corrupt somehow? Or is it about corruption? Anyway, let's see if I have some favorite ones here. It's so squinty, I can't read what they say. Let's see. Future construction. The ruins in Dresden. The bombing of Germany, of course, is all over a lot of these projects, art projects. Whew. It's beginning to look like tourism. Is the ruin about tourism? Is it like visiting the dead? I had this notion of what I call the antechamber. The pyramid's almost done. It's been a long time, right? Many generations have died. There's only one room left. That room is a strange room because it has all the junk that never went into the pyramids, other chambers, and then It's also just outside. So you can have lunch with the dead, or you can have lunch just outside. And you're in this strange antechamber place that you're neither here nor there. And the effect is similar to visiting your own funeral or something. So the ruin gives us a sense of comfort. It's a very strange thing. It should make us feel terrified, but actually it comforts us. It feels as if we're visiting our own funeral, but then we go out to Thai food afterward or something. It's fine. It has this neutralizing effect. Maybe that's what the ruin is. Maybe that we visit a ruin to feel immortal in a way, because it's so much about death. I mean, when I visited ruins, I don't get depressed somehow. It doesn't make me feel gloomy, in the same sense that it should. Then we have panorama for panorama, and then we have simulated ruins. I have all these words I checked out. Oops. You can see I can't type worth a damn. It's terrible. Now what? Let's see, we go further. Images again. Yeah, this is beginning to look more like the installation itself, because and also, addition to ruins, they're also relics, aren't there? Right? They had so many relics of the cross in the Middle Ages that could have built an entire city of them. And the whole concept of the relic is also very strange. Let's see if I can get closer. Then do you know about the ruin cafes? There's a style in Budapest called the ruin cafe. Now we're getting a little closer, right? Let's see. Apparently it's in the old Jewish district of Budapest. Oh my God. So what they do is they make it look more ruined, and then they serve cute food. And at the same time, Hungary is turning fascist. So it must be strange to be in a ruined cafe this week. But the idea that it's a style of cafe all over a district honoring the death of the Jews. That now we're getting interesting. That's beginning to get definitely perverse. And we're entering how cities are playing with this. Try another one. I find the whole grid of these things very odd when I look at them and then I click through them. It's something very strange has happened to our visual memory, I have to say. It's also about spaces between, which fascinate me. But they're not quite connected. They're sort of vaguely connected. This is closer, of course. Should I open up one page? Or, let's see, open up one image just for the fun of it. Oh, this is about the end of the Cold War. I don't know what this is. It just looks colorful. So there's a tree inside the ruin, right? This kind of thing. Which is something that happened when they bombed Berlin. I know that in the Natural History Museum, the roof went, and inside the rafters, a lot of dirt settled, and eventually trees grew out of the rafters of the building. It looked great, but it wasn't turned into a ruined cafe. But I have a feeling it would now somehow. Maybe it would do it. I think it's the Humboldt in the museum island. However, I'll try another one. See if we get closer. So obviously this is becoming a fashion, right? Okay, let's see if this is enough code to take us to that. I guess a lot of you know about this, right? The new one in Hamburg. Hello. It's a, let's see if I can, here it is. I think this is it. It's an old chocolate factory that wasn't torn down, and then they retrofitted 10 theaters on top of it. and it's right on the main river at Hamburg. It's very fancy. So it's what? Right? It's a retrofitted ruin of a very, very modest building of the kind that usually get torn down. Strange. I find it must be pretty interesting. Um, should I show you the High Line? Has everyone seen the High Line? Is everyone in this room who's not seen the High Line? Because it obviously fits into this notion. It was a train trestle of the kind that you always tore down, and then they turned it into this park. And when you walk through that park, you get this very strange, almost suburban sensation that you're in some kind of an amusement-themed area. And then the apartments nearby sell for up to $6 million, especially to Russian oligarch friends of Trump. You know, I don't know. It's just who pays $6 million for an apartment near the High Line? So we have a very odd relationship. In the period of historicism in the late 19th century, the Gothic Revival, they did use Gothic styles inside buildings. I mean, you'd have like a Victorian house that would have strange corners to it, and a little circular or odd-shaped window, so that you could take your crossbow and kill the mailman or something. You know, the medieval effects were there, but this is somehow different. This is actually maintaining the effects, right? Maintaining the objects and crafting around it. It's something very different about our sense of memory. It must be telling us something about cities, telling us something about politics. It must have a message. Maybe the message is odd, right? And corrupted, but fun, right? Strange. And I think we can figure this out. I don't know the people who built this. I find it very strange. I'm not even sure whether I like it. Apparently inside it's amazing, so it probably is fine. But there are other stories. Then we shouldn't, of course, let's get local, okay? Some of you maybe have been here, been to this place. It's quite ridiculous. It's an old bowling alley. Do you know about that place on Figueroa? It's an old bowling alley that was turned into, I don't know, a place for various tech and odd bands for years because no one knew what to do with it. And now they kept the peeled paint on the outside, so you don't know what it is. Then they put a bowling sign there. It costs $40 to bowl. No one knows how to bowl anymore, so people are dropping the ball on their feet, and everyone's eating pizza and drinking beer and spilling it on the ball, and so I mean, it has nothing to do with bowling really, but it has something to do with that bowling represents in our mental capacity how we are supposed to recover these cities, because people of I'm looking around, I'm the oldest person in the room, I think, possibly. But anyway, you're all of the era who know what this hipster thing is about. And it's a desire to recover the city, but under the effects of globalization. Globalization turns out localized us, didn't globalize us at all. It fractured us, it gave us Trump, it gave us Brexit, it gave us the problems in Spain, it gave us problems in the Middle East. It was not global at all, really. It was global as far as everyone knows what latte is, but it wasn't global politically. It dissolved the nation state in many cases, and then created this fascination with very small townships, little towns, little East London towns, little Williamsburg towns, and now Echo Park and Highland Park Town, that's that kind of thing. It's almost like downtown LA is Echo Park adjacent, this kind of feeling. And it doesn't seem to be about an urban recovery. It has a lot of suburban flavor to it also. I mean, it has, like the bicycles out in the suburbs. It's kind of suburban, urban, little town inside a big city without any of the big city, exactly DIY stuff, gig economy thing, startups. It's here, right? And it seems to be fascinated with relics and ruins. And so that bowling alley, somehow, ridiculous as it looks to me, is blasting its music and serving that same goddamn pizza, right? I mean, I can't believe there are that many variations of mediocre pizza that is still possible. And I mean, doesn't anyone know how to make a soup or a stew, or this kind of thing? So there's kind of an instant thing. It's almost like a microwave version of a city. A lot of aspects of older neighborhoods are gone now. The bookstores are gone. The music events are generally less than gone. The public lecture halls are gone. A lot of what used to be there 100 years ago are gone. And so there's some inchoate desire to use the ruin as a way to recover, right? Interesting. And then there's also other versions of ruin that interest me. I'll try another one. You understand, this is you take this into the show, right? And then you get annoyed and happy, no one pissed me off, no one, I don't know if I like it as much now, this kind of thing. But Edison, okay, I think that will work. Let's see if that works. Now, see what the brain tells us. Yes. Where is it now? Can I see it? It's hard to see, but in here there should be some photos. What happened in 1906, there was the earthquake in San Francisco, a tremendous visual interest in what it looked like. People were sending out postcards of the disaster and so on. But the Edison company and then the Biograph company developed new technologies in order to make giant panoramic photos of it. Oh, maybe this is it. Could this be it? I'm not sure, no. But they would make special photos and aerial photos and other things to try to capture the misery and disaster of the ruin. There's a lot of interest in things that burnt down in the early 20th century and visiting the city as a ruin in that way. For example, in 1911, the park Dreamland went on fire. It was the biggest amusement park in Coney Island, or at least the fanciest. And when it went on fire, you could see it burning in Manhattan. And then the next day, they put up a special sign, and for a reduced rate, you could walk through the ashes. The interest in the city in ruin had this kind of narrative. Some people think it was even sensing the coming of the First World War or something. It's a very, very, very curious style. There was a man named, what was his name? That was his name. Oh, George Lawrence. So it has something to do with how one sees the city, obviously, is a big part of it. George Lawrence was called Captive Airship. Another weird thing. This is 1901. He like various people, he used balloon shots to sort of see the city. But then his balloon crashed and nearly killed him. So he developed a new technology using kites wired together with cameras attached to the kites, and he was able to operate aerial photography on the ground. It's really great. There was such an interest in how to capture the aerial view. And then the aerial view has other twists to it. For example, World War II, you have the aerial views of the bombing of the German cities. And then in the 1950s in Southern California, you have instant cities being built to meet all the demand for GI suburbs. And Lakewood was one of the famous ones. And so Life magazine decided it would capture the emergence of Lakewood out of nothing, out of just bean fields, basically. And they needed to find someone who could photograph the emergence of this town, so they hired a man whose specialty was that he photographed the aerial bombing of Germany. So he used the same approach to photograph the building of Lakewood. So I have this strange connection between the ruin and the suburb and progress and so on. The messaging is obviously there. Can we get some messaging from the ruins in this show? I mean, it'd be interesting if we could. How about all the versions of Solomon's temple? Oh my God. Have you ever seen any of that stuff? The ruin of Solomon's temple? I'll give you a few others, and then I'll give you the answer. More or less, right? And then you'll tell me I'm wrong, which is very likely. Okay? Because obviously Solomon's temple is in Jerusalem, and it's so all of the imaginings of what it could be are just extraordinary. It's been centuries they've been trying to imagine what the ruin could possibly also be. Its political meanings, its sociological meanings. They built special maps of it and so on. And there are other examples too. You know about this one, the Garden of Monsters? You know, were you there? Yeah, yes. Is it beautiful? But strange. Does it fit? I think it fits. So we'll visit the Garden of Monsters. Very cinematic in a certain way. Okay, well, hopefully that's enough to take us there. I think so. I think that only means that. Many of you probably know about this. How far is Bomozzo from Rome? Is it close? Yes. So close, sort of. But oh wow, you like it? What? Yes. Yeah. So it's in the environs of Rome, and it does have to do with a man's grief over the death of his wife, and he built this world where you could visit her death and still look at the trees in the same way. So you went into the mouth of the Orc, which is basically the mouth of the god Pluto of the underworld, right? But Orc also is in science fiction and so forth. But this is quite great, quite great. I'm talking about an instant ruin. It's one of the most copied ones. And are these photographs accurate? I've never seen it. Does it feel like this, so green, overgrown? It's very rich. So it's close. These photographs are close. Yeah, I've written about it reluctantly. I hate to write about things I don't visit because I feel like my bad taste needs to merge with the environment. Then the tomb of Mycenae, right? Another imaginary in a way. See, another one I haven't seen actually. So if anyone has seen it, let's see. Wow. So it's something about color tones and textures and space between and what to do with relics. Also, we become very fascinated with unfinished and the process of how things are made. So we have, in effect, movies that almost never get started. They just show you how the effects are being done in a certain way. And the idea of going to an archaeological dig inside a city is somehow very, very appropriate for us now. It's as if there's something we want to excavate, or something we're sensing that we need to excavate. And then of course, we deal with Villar Rojas's fascination with the ruin, right? Which he calls it disappearance. It's more about a kind of sense of debris and a kind of erosion of time. Sometimes that ruin seems to be about how great it was before it crashed and then it crashed. It's like the two time frames coexist, 10 minutes before and 10 minutes after the end, right? Pompeii is the famous case, right? We look at Pompeii and always see the two versions, right? It's always about the present, I feel. So disappearance is true. It's always about the missing footprint. But what are we missing? What is it that we want the ruins to say to us? Now I have my notes, so I'll read, right? What else was I going to? I had other things to present, but I guess the rhythm's all right for me to read my little speech, right? And then we could answer questions and so on. So a ruin is a kind of environment, it's a kind of installation, it's a kind of process, it's often very public, it's almost never left as it was by anyone, even the process of excavating. It's an archaeology set in a dissolving present, time that is simultaneously before and after a catastrophe. And often it's about the inability to see which rupture in the present might lead to huge shocks in the future. That's why Pompeii-type events and earthquakes are so great as ruins, because everyone's just sitting there, having coffee, seducing each other, yelling at their children, whatever, arguing with the plumber, and then the whole world blows up. And it has this, that message seems to about chance seems to be very important. But also it's about the idea that we can't live in the present. We don't really, the present is not available for us. We think we live in the present, but actually the present is already, shall we say, an event that is taking place and will eventually happen. So something is taking place this week that hasn't happened yet, but it's already taking place. And ruins sort of give us that sensation. It's quite great and also a little terrifying, especially in the age of Trump, right? Because we know that he's like a caricatural signal for something. And I see people's faces clouding over just mentioning his name, whatever, There are premonitions we have in the present, and ruins seem to be about these premonitions as well. So what moment is the ruin capturing in a city like Los Angeles? What before and after? Ruins imply a story, usually about hubris. Moments of greatness are brought down. A great parasite strikes down greatness. Or simply the ruins of everyday life, the things that we left out. The fact that people's everyday life, the life of the poor, never leave ruins. They just leave debris, and the debris is thrown away, right? Basically, the ruin is about people of importance. Ruins are always simultaneously highlights of great final moments. The final moments tell stories about hegemonies collapsing, almost always. A ruin is almost about always, the most fun of a ruin is when it's about a whole city that died in the jungle or the end of Egypt. Always going to show images of the chambers in the great Pyramid of Giza. They finally have found a way to see it. They found a way through a laser system to actually see what missing chambers there are, and they're getting closer. But the idea that there are chambers buried in the pyramid, that's so perfect, like even stranger than antechamber. But anyway, our ruins are simultaneity, highlights of final moments. They tell stories about hegemonies collapsing, like Ozymandias, that poem? I'm Ozymandias, see how wonderful my kingdom is, and of course it's just dust and the wind blowing in the desert. Or something being replaced. The Gothic Revival in the late 19th century celebrated the end of medieval landscapes, in effect. Many farming areas had persisted and looked much the same even after the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolutions. But finally, by the 1880s, they were vanishing very, very fast. You read Walt Whitman, and you think, that's Brooklyn? That can't be Brooklyn. How can that be Brooklyn? Well, after 1883, it wasn't Brooklyn, that sort of thing, when the bridge came in. So now it's February 2018. Our Signified today is a ruin set in downtown LA while vast changes are going on. We're going to add maybe 50,000 people to the downtown. With luck, it'll almost be half the size of Glendale when it's done, and this kind of thing. Well, I'm excited. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. $4,000 for an apartment? Why not? Why not? Is there a bathroom? You know, that's fine. Yeah. So what hegemony is in ruins for us? What are we celebrating? My sense is that we're celebrating or obsessed with the end of the Western hegemony, the European imperialism followed by the American moment, and that we realize that the Western hegemony is over. And we're not quite sure what that means because it's so old and so large. It was, in effect, the largest hegemonic system in the world. It makes the Roman Empire look small. And it ended by the early 70s. And somehow people thought that, I don't know, McDonald's and Disneyland would keep it going, you know, and that, you know, the Cold War would keep it going. And now it's pretty clear that we have a moment where our nativism won't even allow it to continue. So, and it's strange to witness the end, right? The end of something so large. You even know how to read it, right? So it's the ruin sort of captures the spirit of it. It's a warm feeling, but an odd feeling. And it's not about making America great again. No one believes that shit. I mean, there was no great again. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. He's a ruin, right? Especially his hair, in my opinion. Right? So that's one. That seems very likely. Then the end of mid-century modernism, which is very much a part of downtown LA coming back afterward. But mid-century modernism left a lot of infrastructure that doesn't work anymore. Water systems that don't work anymore. Freeways that don't seem to go anywhere except to old Cold War locations, or other roads, or other systems, or buildings in general that don't work. And so we're retrofitting mid-century modernism, and we're leaving it, right? This is a building that is obviously a mid-century modernist statement, right, made in the 1980s. And my feeling is when it was built, I remember walking through it when it was built, and it felt like Geary was saying something about artist workspaces, and that it felt raw. It felt like it had a kind of unfinished to it. And the early shows sort of reflected that. I thought it didn't look dusty, but it looked like you could taste the dust underneath in a way. And now every expensive bar looks like this. I mean, they all have the raw wood in the ceiling showing, the beams and so forth. And I think this building has, against its better judgment, been recoded as a statement about the new version of turning ruins into a kind of high consumerist memory. And it's difficult to know what to say. It's not the building's fault. I mean, I know buildings think, we've been told that they think now, right? And now we actually have technology that actually can make smart buildings sentient. But the truth is that the signified of a building is what's around it, not the building itself. It just happens to it. But I think that that's going to be the irony of this. So I think if the show, we don't want to forget also the end of the Anthropocene, right? That we've screwed up the whole planet. This is a very serious problem. So when we see a ruin, we think of climate change, we think of all the disasters. I don't see it was on the next page. That's rather obvious, right? And also, I should point out that ruins, especially now, have a sense of our being a host for a parasite, that a parasite is coming in, right? Almost like trolling us, hacking us, dissolving our full-time job, taking away our health care, right? That something parasitical is happening. And I think partly because the digital is parasitical more than sedimentary. In other words, it comes in and then it kills an industry. It removes the book industry. I mean, industrialism didn't do that. It more or less layered it by comparison. So we have this tremendous sense, especially culturally now, that we're being eaten away by parasites. I had one student who was going to build a special parking structure game with me. We worked on it. It was going to be a labyrinth that made you feel horrible. You thought it'd be fun. And in the labyrinth, you discover that your car is being moved every 5 minutes in the parking structure. And there's a large virus eating away towards your car, and you had to solve the problem. And he was working on it, and he was enjoying it, and then he was hired by Google, and that was it. That was the end of it. So we never saw what actually happened, right? But there are other examples of this. I don't know. I think my time is running out, so I'll stop. But there's the catacombs and Baroque grottos. These are ruins also, and they have to do with the grotesque and with a kind of theatricality about death. Maybe I'll end with one last odd one, and no, I better just say it because we won't have time to chat, right? Let's leave my obsession with this strange brain alone for a while. In 1900, there was a man, Robidas, who was an illustrator, who for the World's Fair built an imaginary Paris alongside the Seine that photographed as if Paris were in the 15th century. And it was just a flat, it wasn't even Potemkin effect, it was just like a movie effect. And the photographs are very, very odd. So they were building fake Paris for the tourists in 1900. Very, very strange how many examples there are of this that we can work with. So what we're talking about is the signified is altered. There's a new imago or mental picture that goes with it. Restaurants made from ruined buildings. It is the ruin of the old slums of the noir inner city, of the pre-World War II neighborhood and social patterns. If this exhibition appeared 20 years ago, as an expert on ruined LA downtown, I can say with authority that the effect would have been immersive from floor to ceiling and seemed highly cinematic, like a special effects movie, like an ancient Persian variation of Los Angeles. But today, high unfurled ceilings speak to the newly densifying downtown as a hipster upscale retrofit. What downtown still has left, its good bones, its 20s streetscapes. Time is frozen in two horizontal slices. So what I see now is this interesting structural simulated ruin on the bottom with all the different spaces, and then it's split in half, and I see a fancy pizza joint, right, and on top. And I think this statement's interesting. I think it's about our fascination with the ruin, right? It's a different kind of mental space, a retrofitted ruin. The museum has been recoded by the history of the city over the past 20 years. So the ruin is about an invasion by a parasite of a certain kind. In this case, the parasite is the economy that followed after the relative collapse of the first stage of globalization. I think that's part of what it is. After that stage, an era of regionalism, nativism, and oligarchy has steadily emerged, what I call an emergent urban industrial feudalism. In such a world, ruins are like plastic surgery. The face is still there, even the wrinkles are still there, but the 20th century is steadily leaving. And that would be my point of ending. And then I think we have time for questions, don't we? I hope I said enough to annoy people so that we can have some interesting discussion or examples. So I'll stop and wait for if there are questions. Yes? Oh, yes, where's the microphone? I mean, this was designed to make you ask questions, not to...
We were just talking beforehand about, in the history of forgetting, the descriptions of desolate downtown Los
Yes.
Angeles, of that era, of the 1990s and before. And
Yes.
I wonder, I used to live in Los Angeles. We just came back after a few years to visit, and seeing downtown densify, as you've described, it's fast becoming the opposite of desolate. And I wonder,
know.
when it gets to be 500,000 people downtown, what will be the traces or the artifacts, what will remind people of the desolate downtown you wrote about in the 1990s, of the old, after dark, it's only the homeless and other...
Yes.
You know what I mean? What's going to remind people?
Well, first of all, it's pretty clear that our economy isn't going to get rid of the problem So there'll be other areas that will have to absorb it. And people are wondering, for example, where the homeless are going to go if the real estate really pushes as fast and hard as it is. I'm looking at someone, we've had conversations about this, right? Everyone's wondering, right? So part of it is that it'll obviously migrate. And then I think within 2 years there's going to be a crash. I don't know what that crash will look like. I can't figure it out. I spent 2 years once explaining from 2006 at the end of every lecture there was going to be a crash, and then I was surprised when it happened. You know, but because I didn't expect it to be quite that way. But I don't think this real estate economy can survive 2 more years. It'll either level or, and what will a crash look like? I don't know, right? And so we have also that the arc is not. See, this is a problem. We're living in the present, but we're not. We can sense that something mad is going on. The rents, the other issues, the overbuilding, the Chinese investments. It's hard to know how this will all play out. My guess is that what we'll have only basically will be the footprints of the buildings in the streets. I'm taking people on tours of Broadway now because Broadway is changing so fast, it's almost changing. I feel like while I'm standing there, buildings are being torn down and built up. You know? Broadway seems to be going through a transition where I suspect within a few years you won't recognize it. So it's strange, yes. And what's odd is that people are still talking to me now that the LA described seems to be disappearing, but it isn't really disappearing in human terms. That's what I'm wondering. Is it that we're going to have more layers? In other words, the surface will look like a Potemkin village, but behind it will be people working 20 hours a week for 30 weeks a year, looking cool in their bicycle and, you know, doing stuff and you know, making it work, making it happen, but working on startups and so on. So I think, number one, it's not going to stay like this. It's not going to be quite what they plan. And I think what we're looking at is a much more layered way of studying cities. We used to be able to study the ugliness of a city or the pain of a city from the buildings. Now we may have to study it more sociologically. Is that a fair answer? So I'm trying to figure out how can I sociologically get used to thinking in layers, because it could be the surface will look cleaner than it really is. I think it's a facade. I don't know how much, but there's no money to support this. Not really, I don't think. Does that make sense to you? No, I made sense, and we know we're both wrong. Any other questions or comments? Or
Thanks. When you were talking about ruins being sort of capturing like the moment before and after the crash or the whatever happened, I was curious if you've looked at, or if to what extent you've seen documentation of abandoned state hospitals. Because it just sort of seems like also this idea about ruins being about the people that are important, like there's an entire like genre of institutional ruins that are all through the country, and they're also being retrofitted. They're turning into condominiums and they're turning into mixed use.
Yeah, I mean, the services in the United States are declining. And obviously medical is at the heart of it, isn't it? So the resources to even keep our system going are fading, or going to continue to fade. So yeah, studying hospitals would be quite amazing. So they're actually turning hospitals into apartment houses or something? I didn't know what this.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a number of years documenting abandoned state hospitals, and definitely in the Northeast there are large Victorian Kirkbride structures that have been turned into condominiums.
Oh, I see. The older buildings from the early 20th century.
They're gorgeous, and or they're like they're that sort of Gothic style. But also like when you made the point about what's going to happen to the homeless, like that the problem is going to be shifted somewhere else, it's also connected to that as well, because the truth is that that what they're doing with that the homeless problem as it exists right now is the result of deinstitutionalization, and it's been the cause of the spike in incarceration.
Yes. And I could point out one other issue that's always obsessed me, that sometimes when I talk about homeless, I take a stack of quarters or nickels and put them in the very edge of a table and then push them over. I say, see, homeless people are here, but for every homeless person, there's 10 times more people almost homeless. So we're not actually addressing the source is not just homeless, right? It's the nearly homeless, it's the impoverished and people on the edge. And we don't seem to know how to see them, right? And this new economy is definitely not noticing them. And it's even affected the last election. But these are all connected to services and not seeing. We're not seeing where we're going. And it's interesting, looking at hospitals, that would be. Do you have a film of it? Is that what you're doing? I'm sorry. It seems...
This was a project from about 2000 to 2006. So
it's old.
It's all still photography, because a lot of the buildings have been torn down or have been, like I said,
I mean, the history of
renovated.
forgetting issue, the erasure thing hasn't stopped. People are constantly dragging me through, schlepping me through all these cities, right? I spent 4 days going through Shanghai looking for what was left that wasn't being torn down. And then we went to a street, two streets that were about to be torn down from the 19th century. So the mid-century modernism was obsessed with tearing things down, but it hasn't stopped. We're still tearing down crucial elements of what there is, and what we're saving is eccentric. Yeah. So something's going to happen. You know, buckle up, I guess. Would you say? Yes. Yes.
Sorry, so my question is more of a clarification. I guess you were talking about how there was this obsession with ruin because of the end of the Western hegemony, right?
I think we have that feeling that we're at that the West, right? The white male West, right?
Yes. So then I wonder, in your studies with China, which I assume everyone is thinking is now the new rising power, how are they choosing what is a ruin and what is saved and what is
Well, as far as I can tell, it's mid-century modernism and postmodern bad taste accelerating simultaneously at the speed of light. I know. I mean, but I'm not in China enough to really have an answer, but China is basically, I mean, even I can tell out of my ignorance. I was only there really once for an extended period, you know, and I wouldn't call it very extended. I came out feeling dumber than I arrived, you know, it's so strange, so amazing. But there are three or four Chinas, and the China in the south, from Shenzhen down to Hong Kong, is the most amazing because it came out, it just burst into this engine. But the Shanghai story is particularly astonishing because it's not done yet. It's not quite clear. And Shanghai has this weird mercantilist connection to China when it was developed and so on. And then you have, of course, Beijing and then all the other districts. So I would say it's which China you're talking about, because there's still 400 million people, I gather, floating around China from not quite planted in jobs as much. The situation is much more fragile than people think. But that's what people tell me. I don't know. I mean, do you know about this?
We were just talking about how Hong Kong, how it's not based on an agrarian society.
No.
We have that post-agrarian evolution that normally happens.
No. Hong Kong was in a way the last mercantilist invention of Britain. And the British and the Europeans weren't able to absorb China the way they did India and the rest. And so they used the old mercantilist model of having coastal bastions of power, and then try to see what they can do from there. And so, in a way, Hong Kong is one of the stranger stories among cities, it seems to me. But I don't know. I mean, I know one thing: to know a city well, you should know it well, and never pretend to know it unless you really have really excavated deeply inside it. So I suspect that someone from Hong Kong might shake his head or her head and say, forget it, pal. You're not even close, you know. But, Hong Kong is an exceptionally curious story, yeah, also. I mean, this is a golden age for cities, partly because the nation state is weakening in various ways, different from country to country. And it's almost like we're back into the 15th century, the era of the Hanseatic cities and of the cities in Italy and so on. Cities are becoming like kingdoms. LA's been rewired into a kingdom of 18 to 20 million people, and it's big, and it's very, very orderly in some perverse way compared to what it was. And it happened just after the end of the Cold War. It's only 20 years or so. It's amazing. It's amazing. And you can feel the engine of different continents running through the city. And it's an amazing time to be in LA. I don't know if it's great in all respects, like traffic, culture, you know, things like that, but modest things. But politically, it's a very, very amazing moment. And I have a feeling that Hong Kong, despite all its problems, may still be like that too. If that's a fair answer. A response. Oh, yes.
Norman.
Hey.
I may challenge you with being the oldest in the room.
You should challenge me.
All right, I will. I was in Shanghai around 2002 and was concerned then about what I was seeing of the number of old buildings that were being torn down in favor of the new. And I had a conversation with Bob Harris from that other private university closer to the Coliseum, who was the head of the architecture department at one point, about that very issue. And he said that the number of Chinese architecture students coming here to the US for education were getting a taste of the whole idea of historic preservation. We have here in LA, the LA Conservancy, which has done a remarkable job of saving buildings that various people despise as relics. And I just don't know if Chinese culture, both from an official government perspective or from within the culture itself, will ever allow for that kind of creation of a community organization that will work to try and keep some of the historic from being destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, and also it's not just buildings, it's cityscapes. The key to understanding preservation, if we're going to speak about it in a positive way without, you know, the real estate finagling that could sometimes come with it, right? But that the cityscapes have to be protected, not just the buildings. Right? And what is a cityscape? I know that in Shanghai they're obsessed with the French concession, for example, in certain parts of Shanghai for some reason. But then they put that Disneyland right in there. I mean, that's got to be a bad decision. I just can't believe you put a Disneyland. But they showed me where Disneyland was going to be, and I looked around. And I thought, you know, I'm sorry, my bullshit detector is going on about 100 miles an hour. I mean, this doesn't look like a good decision. You should, you know, put something more human. So it is very difficult to figure out how to deal with high consumerism, global investments, densification, and then the shrinking of the services that cities need. I don't know which city is doing a perfect job, but Shanghai is definitely not one of the examples of a really completely coherent process. But, it's interesting though. I thought the place was great. Of course, I couldn't breathe, but I was, even by LA standards. They said that the winds of Mongolia weren't coming in this week. I said, sure, I'm from LA, right? The winds of Mongolia, of course, that would be the reason, right? Why I can't even take a photograph at 2 in the afternoon, right? This kind of thing. Yes. Did you want to say?
I wanted to hear you talk about museums some more because I'm curious, within your history of forgetting and the city, I think of the museum as a kind of heart of the urban environment sometimes. They're usually central with a lot of power and money around them.
Yes.
And they're also like the places that maybe, this is what I want to know, is this a facade that they're trying to present a kind of like history and a certain like maybe historiography, preservation, and
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you think about
Yeah,
their presence in the city.
We know that museums now are a signature architectural statement, but now they're building fewer of them. But for a while, every architect of note had to have a museum with their fingerprints on it, right? The fact that these museums are almost never funded properly to show very much afterward is a small problem, right? But I was looking at them trying to understand, watching the new Lockman thing, for example, or the Broad, right? And different examples in Southern California, elsewhere. And I'm beginning to think that maybe museums are becoming almost like reliquaries, if we're going to use the model of the ruin today. It's the reliquary of what the city used to be, right? It's almost like that's where you can actually still find the culture that consumerism has gotten rid of, or the digital's gotten rid of. So museums have a very strange, almost preservational cultural role that they never had before. And I don't know whether that's good or bad, because museums should be willing to really be playful and alive and discursive, right? But it's difficult if you're saving the history of the city, if you're salvaging what's left, if you're the one place where the paintings are still, the one place where cool books can be launched, right? Things like, it's a terrible burden, to have to save the world and make new culture at the same time. So more or less you become kind of a big box format. The pressure is enormous on museums to become, shall we say, symbolic orders for what the city needs and is supposed to have, rather than what they used to call a laboratory experience. It's tough. So if that makes sense, I mean, I'm looking at what Lockman's going to be, this huge, sort of planet LA, environment, and I'm hoping that it also means culture develops out of it. But I'm wondering whether it will be sort of like a space station for urban culture, And I know that museum people are aware of this problem, but the pressure is enormous. So I'm wondering whether we almost are building reliquaries, right? Rather than dynamos, which is what the city and the culture needs. Is that fair? For now, right? Thank you. Thank you for being here. Very patient.